Hi everybody and welcome to the next instalment of the Vassals of Kingsgrave epic quest through Lord of the Rings. Today we're tackling the first book of The Return of the King, which is also known as The War of the Ring. So we have a goodly bunch of podcasters today, all of whom you will be well familiar with if you've been listening to these podcasts. So I guess we'll try and go in time zone order as well, as usual. So if everyone can introduce themselves, starting with Tanya.
Hi, I'm Tanya. I'm signing from the forum. And it's 8 a.m. here, and I got home really late, so don't expect to me.
And you're in Middle-earth still? You haven't come back to Europe yet?
Yes.
Awesome. And then over to Nadia.
Hi everyone, this is Nadia.
And wonderfully concise. And then over to...
Yeah, sorry, I just woke up, so don't expect anything else from me.
Hilarious. And then, I guess, moving towards Europe, Peter?
Yeah, the shelf is on the forums.
Excellent. Then in deepest, darkest southern England, I'm Bina 007 from the forums. And we also have... Oh, Eddie.
Hello, even deeper, darker bits of southern England, only 15 minutes away from you.
And then across the Atlantic, I think we go to White Raven first.
White Raven, Brett in real life.
The Sam hater. And then last but not least, Amanda.
Amanda, MiddleCyclone on the forums.
Awesome, cool. So I guess we should just jump right in. So I think it's over to White Raven. He's doing both chapters 1 and 2.
Okay. Well, Chapter 1, Minas Tirith, begins with Pippin and Gandalf riding Shadowfax wicked fast to get to Minas Tirith. So they come to a bunch of towns, and Gandalf organizes everyone and tells them to get ready for battle. Just a side note, the Nazgul scares people, and Gandalf brings up their spirits. Is that the ring he's wearing, or is that something Gandalf does by himself? Does anybody know this?
I think it's a bit of both.
Well, I thought it was like a fire damage plus 7 ring, so... Shane said that it fires in the hearts of men or something, so...
Which is kind of what I consider him doing. He brushes away the shadow of the Nazgul and brings their spirits back up just by being there. So I was just curious if we thought it was him himself or the ring or a combination of the both. Sounds like both.
Yeah, I guess he's the only wizard with the sort of light powers that he uses at Minas Tirith too, he likes a beam of light against the Nazgul and they could kind of flee from that. I guess Saruman throws a fireball or something, and Radagast just talks to animals. And I guess light and fire aren't exactly the same thing. I mean, it's white light usually, and I guess the ring of fire could be white light because it's an Elvish ring, and they're all pristine and immaculate and also ever wonderful.
Did Gandalf's ability to kind of use sort of spidey sense white light only happen after he became Gandalf the White? Could he do that when he was Gandalf the Black?
Well, he did have the fireworks, and he had some kind of light in Moria. I'm not sure if it was described as pure white or...
They see the signal towers of Gondor lit, and they see the Outriders riding out to call for aid. And Pippin sulks about going closer to Mordor, but he doesn't bitch like Sam would have, because, well, he's not a bitch like Sam.
Sam isn't even in this book.
And Sam carries Frodo on his back up Mount Doom.
I promised I would add him in here. I'm sorry.
Did he volunteer to take a second chapter summary simply because he could bitch on Sam even more?
Yes. I wouldn't have picked this chapter, I'll tell you that. It is long. Alright, so they're stopped by the Gondor welcoming committee, and Gandalf tells him Pippin is a valiant man, and Pippin gets angry and says he's no more valiant than he is a man, meaning not at all. And I can just see Gandalf just shaking his head at this point, shut up, Pippin, stop talking. Because basically Pippin just called him a liar in front of these men, and doesn't even seem to faze them, so must be they're used to Gandalf lying. And they send them on their way, because Pippin name drops Boromir and his fate, so they're like, go, tell Denethor. So then the book pauses the action for a bunch of world building and a brief mention of Prince Imrahil of Almroth, which is one of his few mentions. That's why I bring it up.
Amroth, as we say in English.
Oh, whatever. Yeah. So they come to the gates of Minas Tirith, and Gandalf claims to have ridden on the wings of the storm, so I guess storms have wings like Balrogs do. Either that or Gandalf is a liar. which we've already discussed.
Which we know.
Did anyone else think that Gandalf might have needed some motivational speaking lessons?
He's kind of a dick.
Yeah, he is. I think his line was, "Oh, you have come to the end of the Gondor you have known," but he doesn't actually say if it's a good thing or a bad thing. Mine's probably went to the bad thing.
Yeah.
And have you noticed did you notice how much gossips the Gondorians are?
Yeah, considering the word travels faster than they do.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty hilarious later on when Gandalf is like, at the end of everything, he's like, I deduce that Denethor might have a Palantir. And Baragon and everyone's like, yeah, we all knew that, for years, right? Because we just saw the lights in the tower and we knew what was happening. And they're like, duh.
All Gandalf had to do was talk to an average Gondorian, and he probably would have learned more than a lot of the other sources he used.
Exactly. I just find it hilarious that all the way through this, there's like so many kind of references to the Seeing Stones, and so many references to Denethor knowing stuff, and how does he know it, and just Gandalf, like, seriously, after 9 chapters, maybe he has a Palantir that he's been looking in. Ugh. Anyway, later.
So, the guards send him up to see Denethor, and on the ride up, Pippin notices that Minas Tirith is pretty empty, because everybody's taken off, like all the women and children. They get to Denethor's hall, and Gandalf counsels Pippin to watch what he says. Like Frodo, his errand, and Aragorn are off limits. And he talks about how a king would come, and Pippin's like, "Ooh, a king? Who's the king?" And Gandalf's like, "You idiot." Pippin is clueless.
Yeah, I wrote that down as well.
The thing is, like, Pippin's allowed to be clueless because he's a hobbit. The fact that Gandalf doesn't figure out the Palantir is far more punishable. But just one point, so Minas Tirith is empty now because the women and kids have gone, but isn't it meant to be, even at full strength, a bit empty? Like, it's not meant to be as inhabited as it once was? Or am I making that up?
It is. There's a very haunting scene where they pass a lot of houses on the streets where the houses are just empty and they've been empty for a while.
Yeah, it always reminds me of Vienna, an imperial capital. There's no empire. Sort of, hollowed out somehow.
There's something about empty palaces that sort of like magnifies it somehow. Like there are palaces that are empty. But I guess they would need more people to maintain anyway, so...
A lot of it concentrates on how the Númenórean blood has deteriorated over the years.
Then they stand before the great Denethor, son of Ithilien, Lord Steward of Gondor, and Pippin thinks he looks more like Aragorn than he does Boromir. And he fills Denethor in on the details of Boromir's death. And Denethor thinks his son is too mighty to have been slain by mere orcs, even though Isildur himself is slain by orcs. And I think...
That never occurred to me before, actually. That's hilarious.
It's strange that earlier in the book, Faramir mentioned, when he's talking to Frodo, they talk about Isildur's bane. And he said, I'm sure it wasn't an orc arrow, but it was kind of, because an orc arrow killed Isildur, so an orc arrow actually killed Boromir, so it was Boromir's bane. So both Isildur and Boromir shared orc arrows and the ring as their banes.
Oh, that's fascinating. I never even thought about that.
Yeah, but I don't think Denethor actually holds Isildur in that higher regard, because he sort of refutes Aragorn's claim for being Isildur's heir, because the rule of Gondor is descended from Anarion, or Isildur's nephew.
Yeah. He doesn't think Isildur's line is all that, basically.
Because it's basically the kings of the north, and not king in the north, but and not the kings of Gondor.
Exactly, yeah.
I kind of half converted myself to the idea that Aragorn is a usurper on the last episode when I was talking about it.
Wasn't he descended? There was like one son remaining though, who was too young to go to the battle. That's who he's descended from. I'm sure Anarion was.
I think he's descended from the northern line. Yeah, but then it's according to the laws of inheritance. He would inherit anyway, right? Because he would technically be the last king of Gondor's great whatever nephew.
Yeah, but I mean, Denethor's making the correct point that, okay, technically he might be the heir, but ultimately it's not like he's the sort of the direct, pure descendant in some way. Like,
that's because he hasn't seen his sword yet.
This is true.
Well, the line of kings in Gondor didn't die out. It was just that they had a civil war and then the last king died without an heir, and they had like claimants that could have been the king, but they didn't want to spark another civil war, so they didn't nominate another king. They just left it to the stewards. So the line of kings actually sort of continued in the bloodlines, but they didn't just have another king after some time.
Okay.
So you think that Denethor holds Boromir in higher esteem than Isildur?
Well, I'm not sure how the House of Stewards, how they sort of, what their lineage is, but I guess kind of in a half delusional way, Denethor might.
Right.
Yeah, he is very arrogant.
So this whole Return of the King is a sham.
That's fight talk there, Shellfish.
Okay. So, after that, Pippin offers himself his service in repayment for Boromir saving him, even though he didn't really save him, because they weren't trying to kill him anyway. But anyway, Denethor accepts. Gandalf asks Denethor if he would like to know any of his pressing news about what has taken place, and Denethor claims to already have known, even though no tidings or messenger could have outpaced Shadowfax there, especially if they weren't flying on the wings of a storm.
So why at this point does Gandalf not realize he's been looking into a seeing stone? I mean, it's like if this were an Agatha Christie like murder mystery, the clues are so obviously heavy, it just completely winds me up.
He's a wizard, not a detective.
Well, he's not there all the time. It's probably been like years and years since he's been there.
Okay.
And he's probably there just to give some bad news and then leave.
Yeah.
And call a few people a fool.
But still, the fact that Denethor seems to know all this stuff. And it gets worse and worse as the book goes on, but yeah, I'll hold my fire.
Okay, so then Denethor and Gandalf proceed to have a staring contest of wills. And to Pippin, Denethor looks like a great wizard, more kingly, beautiful, powerful, and older than Gandalf. But he sensed Gandalf was the more powerful, with deeper wisdom, and older, far older. And Denethor loses the staring contest. And he grills Pippin on his journey. Gandalf says, "Do you think I do not understand your purpose in questioning for an hour one who knows the least while I sit by?" And Denethor responds with, "If you understand, stop opening your lying, manipulative mouth, bitch." Maybe he didn't say that. And then tells Gandalf he rules Gondor. So then Gandalf responds by telling Denethor his wizard mission statement of not ruling any realms, but being steward of all lands and everything living, and he will not fail. Gandalf out, and then he leaves.
A mic was dropped.
Yes. If he had a mic, he would have dropped it. He just knocked his staff on the floor.
Did he snap his fingers and...
Yes, he did. Pippin with me.
He said with loads of sass. Mm-hmm.
They leave, and Pippin asks Gandalf when they get back to the chambers if he was angry with him. And Gandalf says he would be mad if he were a movie rendition of himself, but he's not, so he thinks what he did was well done. So then Gandalf tells Pippin that Denethor got a lot more out of him than Pippin knew, because he believes Denethor, if he bends his will to it, that he can see into the minds of men. He also believes Faramir has this gift. And Gandalf calls himself a chess master with a chess analogy of the war to come. So he is a chess master. Then Pippin realizes he's a hobbit, and therefore he must be hungry, so he goes looking for food. And he meets Baragon, a guard of Minas Tirith sent to show him the ropes and give him the password. They go to check on Shadowfax and then find some food. And Baragon tells Pippin...
Only the lesser password.
Oh, right. Well, he just got there. They can't give him all the passwords.
But it's such douchey, condescending thing that Denethor does. Like, you've pledged your life to me, but teach him some of the lesser passwords. Ugh.
But he thinks he's a spy.
Also true.
Baragon tells Pippin over lunch that it is said that Denethor sometimes sits in his high tower, bending his mind to see afar and to see the future, and sometimes wrestles with the will of the enemy. Which maybe would have been nice if Gandalf knew that. So they hear Nazgul cry, and Pippin cringes until the light comes back, and it passes. And then they talk the war. Then Pippin goes with Baragon to meet his company before they go on watch. And Pippin is thought to be a halfling prince who came with the promise of 5,000 swords, and all the Rohirrim would come with a hobbit in tow. But Pippin straightens him out. And I wonder what it would have been like if the Rohirrim had come with a hobbit on the back of all their horses. What difference would it have made, really?
None. I mean, not on horseback anywhere.
Well, one of them made a difference, but I don't know if
Well, yeah, but if there had been... But the Rohirrim made the attack on horseback, right? And if there's a hobbit riding behind them, it doesn't matter because their reach would still be very small.
Maybe they're just like, watch my back.
Well, the hobbits are supposedly pretty good archers because in the scoring of the Shire, they shoot the hell out of those ruffians.
Well, yeah, but when you're riding on a saddle with another much larger person, you don't exactly have the reach of arms to,
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they
manage
could have,
archery.
but you can't really fight with two people on one horse anyway, so you would have had
Exactly.
to
Yeah.
sort of drop them off. But I mean,
Drop them off. That's so mean. They're like, hey, everybody go get them. And then they just ride around and kill them all.
Maybe just get all the hobbits there and form an infantry line with them separately. Maybe.
Not a very
I don't
Hobbit
know.
shield war.
There'd be a lot of Haradrim with, like, bleeding out of their ankles. That's all.
Alright, so Baragon sends Pippin to find his son to keep him company while he's on watch, and Pippin meets his son, and they become fast friends. And they head to the gate together, and then they go to the gate and watch the reinforcements come in, and not many as expected because everybody's leaving people to defend their homeland. And last to come is Prince Imrahil, Dol Amroth, and his army, and then they return to the city and part ways. Pippin finds Baragon again and is told that Denethor wishes to see him first thing in the morning. So Pippin goes to his chamber hoping to find Gandalf there, but he's not, and Pippin goes to sleep. Pippin is awakened in the night by a pacing Gandalf. Gandalf is in a mood, wondering why Faramir has not returned, and he tells Pippin there will be no dawn, for the darkness has come. And that's the end of the chapter.
Again with the cheerleading. I just need to quote, I mean, not that I'm getting really boring about this, but Baragon says, Denethor sits alone in his high chamber in the tower at night and bends his thought this way and that. He can read somewhat of the future, and that he will at times search even the mind of the enemy wrestling with him. Baragon knows that he has a Palantir. Just saying.
Actually, I got a little confused because all the while I was thinking Gandalf didn't know about the Palantir, but then there was this one line which I did not write down, I think. But I got the sense that Gandalf did know about the Palantir, so it's kind of confusing.
Yeah, he fesses up in chapter 9 that oh yeah, I seem to recall that Denethor has a Palantir, but I just assumed he'd never look at it because he'd realise that would be really hard.
Exactly.
It's even worse.
I think he says at one point,
if he knows there's a Palantir in the White Tower, then isn't it kind of obvious that somebody as arrogant and, in like Denethor would be using it? Somebody who's as desperate as Denethor.
At one point he does say, I long thought he would use the Palantir.
So why would you not assume that at the moment of desperation, he'd be using it? I mean, anyway.
What could have been done if he had found out? Would it be like, hey, don't listen to that shit. It'll rot your brain, don't look at the thing.
He would have said, don't look at that. This place is coming to an end anyway.
But he might have scolded him. He might have said, look, I know you're looking into this thing, but by the way, he's only showing you part of what's going on, and don't do a Melisandre, don't misinterpret. I mean, he might have helped, because what we don't really get from the book, but you do get a little bit from the kind of the wider, the appendices and whatnot, is that Denethor at one point was a wise guy. He's not an idiot. He's a man of wisdom, and he's a man of moral and mental strength. He resists more than most. So, I'm sure that if Gandalf had really perceived that he was using the Palantir, he could have counselled him and made him, kept him being a good ruler, maybe. But maybe we can talk about that more in the Pyre of Denethor chapter.
He should have told him to tale of the children of Rohan, pretty much, because it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah. I kind of feel that Denethor's a bit of a Tywin character, that if his beloved wife hadn't died so early...
Oh yeah, speaking of that, the three of them is exactly like Tywin, Jaime and Tyrion, if you look at it.
Absolutely.
If Faramir had been born a hobbit.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, and if Faramir hadn't been quite so high and had wenched a little bit more.
We get no evidence he doesn't wench.
I don't think Faramir wenches.
Red Lantern District of Minas Tirith.
Exactly. No, I mean, the only thing I want to say is that I was watching the movie today, and it just struck me that in the movie Denethor's much more of a pantomime villain, and Book Denethor, although he does egregious stuff, there seems to be a lot more sympathy for him or a lot more respect for him. So, for instance, like Gandalf in the movies will boss Denethor around a lot more, and he'll cast off his staff and like knock him to the floor. Whereas Book Gandalf has a lot more respect for his position and certainly wouldn't kind of overtly threaten him in front of his guards and whatnot. And I much prefer Book Denethor because I think, there's all sorts of characters as we go through this particular book who at times will despair and have no hope and sort of go willingly to their death. And they don't do it in quite the extreme nihilistic way that Denethor does it, but there's a lot more sympathy to the fact that, Theoden, that he's a good man ultimately undone by the deeds of his time.
Does Gandalf really take Denethor's staff in the movie?
There's a point where he kind of knocks him back into his chair, and the guards are standing there, and you're just like, come on, this is the steward of Gondor. That wouldn't actually...
Yeah, that's not going to happen.
No, dick move. Does that really happen? I don't remember that.
It does happen. I just saw the movie recently as well, so yeah, it does.
That tone of skepticism is so insulting. Anyways, on to chapter 2.
Alright, chapter 2, The Grey Company. Merry joins Aragorn, Gimli, and Legolas to ride with the Rohirrim to the muster at Edoras. Aragorn says he will go to Minas Tirith, but it may not be the same path as the Rohirrim. They are overtaken from the rear and turn to face their pursuers. The spokesman of them claims to be Halbarad of the Dunedain, and Aragorn rushes to embrace him and show off his new sword to him. With Halbarad were 30 of the Dunedain Rangers and Elrond's sons left and right, and they tell Aragorn their father counsels him to take the path of the dead. Their real names are Eladin and Elrohir, but they really don't matter. They might as well be left and right. Aragorn notices Halbarad holding a rolled-up standard, and he asks what it is. He, in a token way, says, "It's your standard that Arwen made." Aragorn then goes up to the Hornburg with Halbarad to take counsel with himself. As we know, only in Tolkien, smart people can only take counsel with themselves. Gimli and Legolas decide it was Galadriel who sent the Dunedain. Gimli wonders why their kindreds did not come. Legolas suggests that is because they have no need to march to war because war marches upon them. And so Tolkien skirts around the dwarves and the elves being shitty and not helping out. Merry gets downtrodden because he feels he's a burden, but he doesn't bitch and complain like another hobbit probably would in this situation. Theoden tells Merry he's no burden, he can ride up front with him. And Merry pledges him his sword, and Theoden accepts. As the Rohirrim prepare to leave, they notice Aragorn has not yet returned from his self-counsel. When he returns, he joins his rangers, looking older and more tired than Merry has ever seen him. He tells Theoden his path lies apart from theirs, and that he will take the path of the dead. Eomer tells him if he takes the path of the dead, he may never meet again. Aragorn tells Eomer that this is his path, and they may indeed meet again, though all the hosts of Mordor lie in between. There's a little prophecy from Aragorn right there. And the Rohirrim depart. Aragorn tells Legolas and Gimli that he looked into the Palantir, and Gimli asks if he said anything to him. Aragorn responds by reminding Gimli that he is Aragorn, son of Arathorn. He's the fucking man in these parts, and he owns that there Palantir. And he has the right and the strength of mind and will to use it, but barely. He tells Gimli he said no word to him, but he put on his king face and sent the Dark Lord a selfie of Isildur's heir holding Isildur's reforged blade in his greatest scene of sword showing yet. And the Dark Lord was scared. Aragorn proceeds to wrench it from Sauron's domain. In the Palantir, he saw the corsairs of Umbar approaching from the south in great numbers. Aragorn deems he shall travel the path of the dead and fulfill the prophecy to rouse the oath breakers that wait there to fulfill their oath to fight Sauron in their great need and gain peace. All in the company agree to join him. Aragorn, Legolas, Gimli, and the Dunedain, and left and right, ride to Dunharrow to begin the path of the dead. Upon arriving in Dunharrow, Aragorn meets up with Eowyn and tells her her king is on the way. Eowyn counsels Aragorn not to travel the path of the dead. She thinks he is throwing away his life, then asks to join them, and Aragorn turns her down and reminds her that she's in charge of her people, and she should do what she's been told. But she's ungrateful and doesn't care. She just wants more.
Do you see her as like a needy girlfriend?
Well, they give her like this great honor that no woman has ever had to lead them, and then she just leaves them. Yeah, very shitty of her.
Because she's had this horrible life With no one to talk to,
Horrible life.
and no one to look up to. Yeah, this like lecherous, nasty groomer, like leching after her, and her parents died when she was young, and like she's watching the only man she's known as a father like slip into frail dotage, and suddenly this like honourable, wonderful guy comes along, this idea of nobleness, and she wants to go with that. Is that so hard to understand?
Yes.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, she deserts her post, right? If it had been a man in her place, he would have been executed for desertion.
You guys,
that's the problem.
If it had been a man in her place, it wouldn't have killed the Witch King.
That's true.
Oh, yeah.
Such an idealistic setting that I don't think like you can desert your post when it feels right to you, because Aragorn does it and he gets pardoned by Faramir, and I guess that's the only example I have, but okay.
Well, yes, but Aragorn wasn't in charge of his entire people, right?
yeah, and and also the example of Aragorn is a really interesting one, because Faramir says, or he's told by Gandalf, go back and tell your captain why you deserted your post, but don't be upset if he sacks you from the city guard. Like, even though Tolkien evidently thinks that it's better to save a life than follow orders, like within the context of the book, Tolkien thinks he will indeed be punished for it.
But I think Eowyn works out some kind of deal. I mean, she has some kind of deal going on with Elfhelm, the captain, and I guess she could have left somebody in charge who knew what they were doing.
But the people chose her to lead them.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I just think it doesn't matter. Like, everyone, there's no point defending the homestead, because if they don't go to war and win it, it's all for nothing anyway, right? So I've never really blamed Eowyn for that.
Okay. So Aragorn departs the next morning, and again, he does not allow Eowyn to come. They come to the dim hold, and everyone is on edge. All but Legolas fear to enter. I have a question, if anybody can answer it. Why is it Elrond's sons fear to enter? Is it because they're like half human?
Man. Yeah.
But they're not.
That's how I read it.
They're elves. Like, they've chosen the elven destiny. Would Elrond be scared to walk in there?
But they still have like the half elven blood, right? I don't know how that works, but
I don't think it's half.
Yeah, I don't know how that works either.
But quarter or whatever.
Because I mean, isn't Arwen like 2,000 years old or something, and she's like choosing to be a woman right like now, so they have like a pretty long grace period, like they can have the best of both worlds, like, nah, I think I'm gonna be a man anyway, so even though I've been an elf like all this time.
It would have been funny if when she decided that, she just got really old and died right there on the spot.
Womp womp. Struggles.
Yeah, but I think the Sons of Elrond, they're sort of referred to as men in a couple of chapters.
Are they?
Yeah. I think, like, in Helm's Deep, when they're over there, the Rohirrim had never seen, like, men of such grace as the Dunedain and the Sons of Elrond or something like that.
But don't they eventually take the ships from the Rohirrims?
I don't think they're...
They chill out in Middle-earth for quite a while, I think.
But eventually they leave.
Yeah.
Instead of dying.
I think they do.
Yeah, they leave.
Yeah, so probably they choose to be elves, right? But maybe it's because they still have a choice that they're still scared of the parts of the dead.
Maybe it's just because they're wusses.
But they're supposed to be great warriors, right?
Yeah, they have bows. No great warrior carries a bow.
They like hunting orcs who are cannon fodder, so anything tougher than that, they just go, yeah.
Did you say no great warrior carries a bow?
According to Jamie, he hates bows.
Yeah, but I mean, it's not really a warrior thing to carry a bow. It's kind of like cowardice, sneakiness. Like, it's honest to beat somebody up with a sword or an axe or something like that. Your bare hands. Anything less than that, it's just cowardice.
Is this what you think, or is this what someone else thinks that you're quoting?
This isn't an opinion, it's a truth.
No, it's not.
No.
I definitely understand where he's coming from.
But then most modern weapons are like substitutes for arrows, right? Like guns.
Well, but they're warriors, they're soldiers.
So?
Yeah, well, the terminology of a warrior, I think.
Weaponry now is not hands-on, but that doesn't mean it's any less violent or...
So basically, oh my goodness. So you don't think there's any historically great warriors who had a bow and arrow?
Well, maybe historically, if there's a dragon or something, then you can use a bow, but only if it's like something you can't reach with a sword. Then
Shellfish only hates bows and arrows because those are Legolas's preferred weapons.
Maybe a little bit.
Oh, dear. Okay.
Okay. And so horses to enter leaving only...
I think they have swords, actually. Do they describe
No, they have
them?
bows with stars on them.
Stars.
I love you guys' contempt.
They said that later on when they get off the ship.
Aragorn wears a star all the time. It's not...
And a necklace. A pretty little girly necklace.
So they coerce the horses to enter, leaving only Gimli, and he's guilted into entering by the thought of giving another reason for the elves to ceaselessly pick on poor little dwarves. As they walk in the darkness, they feel as if they're being followed. They find the body of Baldur, son of Brago, who senselessly made a drunken oath to enter the paths of the dead. He could not enter, but Aragorn and his sword can. So they go through the caves. They exit, being followed by the dead, and head to the Black Stone of Eric, where the Oathbreakers swore their oath to Isildur. All flee before Aragorn, the king of the dead. They come to the stone, and Elrohir blows a horn, and Aragorn reveals himself as Elisar, Isildur's heir, and calls them to fill their oath. They slept that night and left in the morning. Everyone continued to flee. The next day there came no dawn, and the grey company passed on into the darkness of the storm of Mordor and were lost to mortal sight, but the dead followed them. The end.
Which is a pretty cheap cliffhanger, I felt.
Yeah.
It's like Hamlet with the pirates.
But you wouldn't get the amazing entrance of them in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields if you already pretty much knew they were coming there. Do you know what I mean?
True.
Yeah. It's a great catastrophe moment there.
Yeah, that's like one of my favorite parts in the book. When Eomer gets there, he's just throwing himself away, and then he's like, oh, yeah, never mind. We're going to win.
Yeah, I think we get a good hint of what Aragorn would be like if he had the ring. I think Legolas says as much later on.
Yeah, he'd be fucking awesome.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit that says, it was only his Aragorn's will that drove everyone on. It's like he was follow me, and they're like, okay.
Except for Legolas, because he didn't care about the dead. They didn't bother him at all. It's cheating.
We get both Aragorn and Faramir multiple times. Even for Faramir, it says, he can master both men and beasts. So his will kind of gets his men to get back to the gate of Minas Tirith when the Nazgûl are attacking them. And I think it's the same way for Aragorn as well.
Yeah, he talks to the horses or something, I guess the elves do as well. And they can lead them on to the paths of the dead, even those are frightened. Okay,
so I have a question for the guys on this podcast, because I've always thought Eowyn is a really admirable, amazing character and far more attractive than Arwen, but I'm detecting some Eowyn skepticism. So do you think she actually comes off as are you guys interested in her as a character or not really? I think you seem quite dismissive of her wanting to go with Aragorn.
I do like her. That's the confrontation with the Witch King is probably, it is one of my favorite scenes in the whole series of the books. So I do quite like her. But yeah, I guess you guys brought up the oath breaking and all that. That kind of puts a blemish on it a little bit, maybe.
I mean, I love Eowyn, but I just think that if her character had been replaced by a man, the consequences for him would have been much different than they were for her. It doesn't mean she's less awesome because of that, but the truth is she did desert her post.
Okay.
Yeah. But the whole defeating the Witch King was amazing.
Also true.
And she's a very strong character. Yeah.
They did pardon her for leaving her post. They said something like, "Oh no, that was Mary." He's like, "Well, I won't discredit you just because you have a lot of heart." It's kind of the same with her.
Yeah, well, you can't just, if she did defeat the Witch King, you can't just, execute her for desertion after that.
Yeah, it's like a one-time get out of jail free card for desertion.
I can see them walking into the houses of healing and Aragorn being like, "Should I heal her?" And Eomer being, "No, she left her post. Let her die."
Yeah, I guess they're just doing it more to protect her than anything to leave her there. And I guess she is a good leader for the people there, but...
I think they chose her to lead them because, she's been the one, Theodred and Eomer were off fighting for a long time, and Theoden was falling under, Wormtongue's power, and Eowyn was the one they looked to for a long time. So I think it's just a natural conclusion of that they chose her to lead them.
Yeah, I think, I guess this might just be her uncle and her brother that didn't want her to ride to war, because the captain that she rides under the elf helm, he seems pretty cool with it. He sort of willfully hides her over there.
Mm.
And
I never understood why he would do that. If the king ever found out, he'd be pretty angry, right?
Yeah, they didn't tell you in the book, but he got slaughtered after the battle.
No, he became
Eomer
like one
killed
of the
him
marshals.
right away.
I think he became one of the big people after that.
I'm sure he wasn't killed.
Yeah, I know. I'm saying that why would he let Eowyn ride with them, considering what the consequences could be for him?
They probably thought they were all dying anyway.
Maybe. Yeah, they all thought they were riding to their death, so it didn't matter.
He's like Denethor. Yeah, you can choose whatever way you want to die.
On to the next chapter.
So, the Muster of Rohan, Merry and Theoden's party, including Merry, ride to Dunharrow after Aragorn and the party have already gone there. And this time we get the full description of the Vale of the Dunharrow, the refuge there that we didn't get when Aragorn came through there. It's kind of interesting how the two parties come there separately in the book, but in the movie they sort of made them come through there at the same time, kind of seemed kind of economic. There's no real reason for them to go in separate ways here, I don't think.
I think Theoden chooses a much slower path, and Aragorn wants to get there faster.
Yeah, I think Aragorn goes through the mountains, doesn't he?
Yeah.
I think he goes by the plains. Aragorn takes the plains, and Theoden rides through the mountains.
Well, Aragorn goes to Helm's Deep, and that's in the mountains as well, so...
That's where they depart, that's where they go their separate ways, though.
Yeah, I think Aragorn goes by way of the plains, because Theoden, I think they're more afraid of the Nazgul, and Aragorn isn't quite as bothered by them. I think they play a large part in why they choose different paths.
Alright, well, they come to their Dunharrow, and all the men are sort of rejoicing to see Theoden as usual, and they hear news that a Nazgul has been flying over Edoras, and I think it actually even landed on Meduseld, and but the Nazgul haven't flown over Dunharrow, and they're hidden over there, and most of the Muster of Rohan has already gotten there to the refuge there, and they meet up with Eowyn, and Eowyn just sort of recounts what already happened in the last chapter with Aragorn, and they ruminate a little more about how he's going to die in the Patch of the Dead, and then they get ready to ride to war, and then the messenger from Gondor comes with the red arrow, and they sort of okay, we were already going to battle, so this doesn't really help us at all, so thanks. I much prefer the movie version of this when they do the beacons, and although I've harped on this on quite a few episodes already, but I like the fact that Theoden sort of has a moment of doubt there and has to overcome it, and it makes that moment all the sweeter when Theoden goes Aragorn goes, Gondor calls for aid, and Theoden goes, and Rohan shall answer, and then the music plays. Oh, it's awesome.
That is a really good scene.
I felt like I was transported to the movie.
Yeah, well, not much happens in this chapter. I guess we get the confirmation that the skeleton that they found in the Patch of the Dead was Baldur, son of Gregor, who, like Brett said, that in a drunken boat sort of says, was like, hey dude, I'm gonna go to that mountain, that door that they said that never go to, I'm gonna go through it. And they were like, whoa dude, you have balls of steel. And then he died. Yeah, and then the morning comes, and the sort of the outcover from Mordor, it's not black, it's like brown smoke or something. The smog from Mordor's chemical weapon factories or something comes up, and there will be no dawn Rohan either. So, do you guys think that sort of the smog cover that's like a magical thing, or is it like a chemical thing?
I'm not really sure. I don't think they really go into it.
I mean, they have
maybe it's a combination.
Yeah, could be that it's from Orodorum, the Mount Doom, that it comes, because I guess like when there's big eruptions of volcanoes that can cover like a large area, like a few years ago with Iceland, planes couldn't fly. So I guess I'm not sure how far distance it's from Rohan to Gondor, but yeah, it could be plausible.
Yeah, maybe it's just, they have the smog available and Sauron harnesses it and sends it off to Gondor and Rohan.
Yeah, and I guess
maybe
they
a combination
have
of
sort of,
natural and...
yeah, I guess it could be like that he's just sort of controlling the winds or something. But the sort of forces of Mordor also have the sort of siege weapons, like they have, I guess, some sort of analog to gunpowder. They blow the outer wall on the Pelennor Fields. So that's not just Saruman that has that sort of explosive technology. It's kind of interesting.
It makes sense. Saruman probably got it from Sauron.
Yeah, I've sort of always interpreted it in the movie as, at least when Saruman is sort of making it, that he came up with it because he's like a learned wizard, but could very well be.
There's an interesting line in the maybe it's the Voice of Saruman chapter when Gandalf's saying that Sauron obviously tricked Saruman through the Palantir and probably made Saruman think like he was getting lots of information from Sauron, but all the time Sauron was probably just using him and learning all his cool sort of like modern weaponry tricks. So I think the implication is actually that Sauron learnt his stuff from Saruman on that score.
Oh, cool.
I guess it's not that much different than Gandalf having fireworks as far as like explosive powder goes. It's just used on a higher scale.
I mean, what's actually more impressive is just making a physical catapult that can get over the first wall. Like, I think it's more impressive as a sort of basic engineering feat than as an explosive feat.
Wow.
Yeah,
I mean, if you have the trolls they had in the movie, they could just throw people over the wall.
There's some very specific calculations going on there. I mean, they just bring in the siege engines, they draw a line, they know exactly how far from the wall to put it, and then, the exact arc where they will be able to get something from that to over the walls. Those are some massive calculations.
Yeah, orcs know math.
And physics.
I mean, I think actually one of the most sort of sinister things about the Siege of Gondor chapter that Teddard's going to kind of summarize is the idea that you sit there for a whole day and you just watch them when you're waiting in the city, putting up all their weaponry, digging their trenches, making their calculations. And I was just kind of like thinking back what it must have been like in the medieval world to sit in a castle that's under siege. I mean, it must be absolutely, because you're absolutely seeing what these people are up to. It's just horrific.
Yeah, just think about Stannis. That's at I always forget it. I think it was Stormtown.
The Siege of Dragonstone.
It was Dragonstone.
Yeah, the Mace did fuck all. He just had dinner.
That's
Good old Mace.
Yeah, but I mean, it does at least kind of like, I mean, I have some sympathy for Stannis because I think it must warp you as a person to have to endure that, I think.
Yeah, when you're only 18.
Especially when you hold yourself responsible, like you're the Lord Commander of the garrison. I mean, it's just horrific.
Yeah, I think this is a Gondor chapter that we haven't even gotten yet to, but it's very well written, the sort of dread you get from it. I mean, even though you have a lot of magical elements and actual like ring rates and stuff like that, you can sort of actually get the feeling of like being under siege. It's very sort of oppressive.
And I think you can tell that Tolkien was involved in siege warfare and that he knew what trench warfare was as well. It's so, I mean, it's concise as well. I mean, it's a long chapter relative to all of ours, but what amazes me about Tolkien is he can write very complex tactical battles, as we'll get to with Pelennor Fields, but they're only like 10 pages long, these chapters.
Yeah, I guess if we want to get back to Gondor, I can sum up this chapter, like, and then they're about to leave, and Merry is left behind, and then this, like, weird dude called Dernhelm, like, picks him up and takes him with him, and I think you have the translation for Dernhelm there?
Yeah, I looked it up. It's hidden protector or secret defense.
And so cool.
But couldn't Helm actually
bag.
mean helm? Master bag. Couldn't the helm part actually just mean the helm? Because I think in the Battle of the Pelennor Fields chapter it says something like the that the helm of her secrecy had fallen off or something like that.
Yeah, but the helm itself means protector, right?
Helm probably, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, helm is Old English and means protection. That's the same as the helm Steve was named after.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Didn't know that. All right. Well, that was the Muster of Rohan. Muster of Rohan.
I do think that one sentence is worth saying out, where it says, he caught the glint of clear grey eyes, and then he shivered, for it came suddenly to him that it was the face of one without hope, who goes in search of death. I think it's just really important to acknowledge how suicidally kind of morose Eowyn is at this point, so that when we then come to the Houses of Healing and her little love for Faramir, we can see the transformation. Because at this point, this is really low. This is probably about as bleak as we've had for a good guy in the whole book to this point, right?
Yeah, there's
There's definitely depression going on.
Yeah, but even at this point, Denethor's not quite as kind of burnt earth, scorched earth, let's just kill everybody.
It's true.
Yeah, in the movie they sort of give the impression that that's the mindset of the Rohirrim going into the battle because they scream death at the first charge, but in the book it's actually just after sort of Eomer gets all upset that they start screaming death before that they're singing. So I think
it's after he sees Eowyn, he gets totally mental.
Yeah, I kind of sort of usually looking at the movies more than the book, I sort of assumed that was more the sort of mindset of the Rohirrim in general and not just Eowyn, but I guess it's more specific to her in the book.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, just an overriding thing is that, because I watch the movies more than I read the books, you kind of forget how important Eomer is and how his psychology and the rise and fall of that does determine kind of battle action, whereas in the movies he's just kind of like a forgotten dumb jock character. So it's just weird when you read it and think, oh yeah, it does matter. It matters that he feels so wretched when his sister dies.
In this chapter, I love the world building, like the description of the Pukel Man.
Oh yeah.
It's really interesting. And do we ever hear about them in any of the other books?
The Voses that they meet later on, you mean?
Yeah, the Voses and the Pukel Man. Yeah.
I mean, the Pukelmen, I'm not sure if the implication was that they were made by the Voses or that they were made by some other people to resemble the Voses, but the Voses were the sort of the model for them. I think
these are the guys that the Númenóreans meet when they come back from Númenor.
Yeah, I was really intrigued by this chapter as well, the world building. I'm glad you mentioned it, Nadia. It's like how these ruins are much older than Rohan, the country. Like the Rohirrim came here and they just found these like ruins of an older civilization that they had no idea what it was about, like, and that it was like built in the dark times before the Númenóreans even came to Middle-earth. That it was the people that were sort of under the servitude of Sauron. That is the army of the dead before they became the Shades, that they were sort of slaves to Sauron and were hiding in the mountains and had these like foreboding things in the mountains. Really cool.
Is this the one where Theoden tells the story about how the king came to the dim hold and there was this guy sitting outside it who died while talking? I'm
not sure on the timeline like how long it took for all the people of Dunharrow or the army of the dead people to die out, because I guess Isildur cursed them and after that they were cursed, but I mean the establishment of Rohan as a country, that's like thousands of years after that. I guess they could have been like dwindling and that old guy could have been the last of them, I guess. But I guess we just don't know, or we could know if we read the appendices, but I haven't in that much detail.
Yeah. I don't remember that ever being mentioned again.
Okay, so we move to Chapter 4. Okay, Chapter 4, The Siege of Gondor. Gandalf and Denethor take counsel while Pippin marvels at the amount the Lord seems to know about people that live far away, though it must, he thought, be many years since Denethor himself had ridden abroad. Later that day, Pippin and Beregond are on the walls and they see a party of soldiers under attack by the Mordor Air Force. Beregond guesses that must be Faramir's company. Gandalf eventually rides out and saves him like a boss. And upon returning to the city, Faramir, who seems to Pippin, was one of the, with an air of high nobility, such as Aragorn at times himself revealed. Less high perhaps, though incalculable and remote, one of the king's men born into a later time, but touched with the wisdom and sadness of the elder race. He knew why Beregond spoke his name with love. Here was a captain that men would follow, even under the Black Wings. Faramir is shocked when he discovers Pippin in the crowd through his very high voice. But Gandalf steps in and they go to meet the steward, where Faramir relates the story of his meeting Frodo and Denethor, and Gandalf incurring the jealousy of Denethor, while Faramir looks to Gandalf for guidance. Anyone got any comments on Denethor's jealousy of Gandalf?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really kind of at a basic level, and it makes me believe that he really does love Faramir. Like, the standard line is that Denethor doesn't give a shit about Faramir and loves Boromir, but he's so pissed off with Faramir, like, being being mentored by Gandalf. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, he seems very jealous of Gandalf for taking away his son's love.
But he's got a Freudian excuse for that, hasn't he? Because his father was sort of loved Aragorn when he was in Gondor in disguise more than he did Denethor, I think.
Yeah.
So I guess he's sort of transferring that trauma over there.
Well, he's kind of like Gandalf.
Yeah, but doesn't that imply that he loves Faramir? I mean, he knows that he loves Faramir.
I look at it as like Gandalf is like the Ned Stark, and Faramir is Theon, and he's like been trying to like praise him up, but then Denethor just hates him because of Gandalf.
Faramir as Theon, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
We just mentioned he likes whoring. I mean, why does that not make him Theon?
Yeah, and Balon and Denethor kind of look alike too.
In the movie.
Yeah, that's the real version, just like the
the
HBO show is.
version. Because the film's actually a documentary. We all know that, right?
The only other thing I would like to point out, in my defense, because I know White Raven found it really hilarious that I kept calling Faramir High with a capital H, but when even Pippin, who's not the sharpest hobbit in the Hobbit pack, notices in that big long speech that Faramir is very high, and then people would follow.
Maybe Faramir's Middle-earth's first hippie, and he's just high all the time.
No, like, isn't that like Merry and Pippin, like smoking the pipe weed at Isengard?
That's how they can tell that he's so high. They're like, look at him, he's high, I can tell.
He's totally big. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Denethor interprets the tale as meaning the ring will soon be with Sauron to their doom. And in Gandalf fears the treachery of as of yet unnamed Shelob. Denethor chastises Faramir for his decision to let Frodo go. Ever you desire to appear lordly and generous as a king of old. Denethor harshly says that Faramir should have died rather than Boromir. And Faramir finally loses his cool and reminds Denethor it's Boromir who went to Rivendell. Gandalf delivers a smackdown with the truth that Boromir would have kept the ring for himself and not given it to Denethor. Denethor claims that he would have hidden the ring in the vaults and not used it, but Gandalf is sceptical.
And rightly so.
I love this of Faramir, who is so high. Like, it's like the only scene where he, like, is remotely real and, like, teenager-ish, like, oh, come on! Like, why is it that Faramir...
Come on, Dad!
Yeah, like, seriously? You're gonna hold Boromir's death over me when you sent him? Oh.
I think it's a kind of cool language used in that when he's talking about the ring, he sort of betrays himself there, and it's done well in the movie as well, when he's like, never to be used unless at the uttermost end of need.
But who qualifies that?
And at that point,
well,
Gandalf was saying...
Maybe me.
But even
even
at that point, Gandalf's like, yeah, this guy would totally use some shit hidden in the vault. But maybe he would not use the Palantir hidden in the vault?
Just gonna say that.
He has no
I mean, Pippin notices that, Denethor knows so much about people who live so far away, and it must have been a long time since he rode out himself. And Pippin, who's the most
there are seriously, like, there are 8
perspective of the Hobbits. Even he notices that something is up, and Gandalf doesn't realize that Denethor is using the Palantir.
There are probably 8 creatures of the Indus who realize that he's using a Palantir.
He even says that he notices like a light in Denethor's eyes when he's talking about the Palantir.
Yeah. And even then Gandalf doesn't realize.
Yeah, it has to be, like, I'm always the one who accuses George R. R. Martin of bad writing at some points when he just doesn't keep consistency, and I think this is the one example I can think of where Tolkien really makes a misstep. Like, I think he just shouldn't have had, he should either have not have had Gandalf know that there's a Pelennor in the vault, or he should have not had so many heavy hints. Or he should have made Gandalf more suspicious, like growing suspicions, rather than nothing. I deduced in chapter 9. And everyone else is like, yeah.
Good work, big guy.
The next morning, the city despairs under the influence of the Mordor Air Force. The captains meet and judge it wise to sit back and defend the city, hoping Rohan will come. But Denethor refuses to abandon the Ramas Echel, which is the outer wall. Faramir volunteers for the mission. If I should return, think better of me. That will depend on the manner of your return. Gandalf tells him not to go, but he does anyway, and the remaining men wait for Rohan, though Gandalf reminds them that the Red Arrow only reached Rohan 2 days ago. The next day, news comes that Faramir has been fighting a losing battle at Osgiliath. The orcs have built many rafts in secret and crossed the river. Faramir's troops are heavily outnumbered. Still, he stays with the rear of the retreat, lest it turn into a rout. Gandalf tells Denethor that the Ramas has been breached, and pleads with Denethor to send out a mounted sortie party to rescue Faramir's troops. Denethor, being his usual upbeat self, delays and is generally snarky at Gandalf about everything. Any comments?
Yeah, about the battle strategy. It just seems kind of stupid of Denethor to me. The Ramas Echor is really, really long, and he's got a dwindling force on his side. Wouldn't it have been better to just retreat within the walls of Minas Tirith, which are very, very strong, instead of trying to defend this really, really long, really, undefendable wall, really? And if Gilead has already been lost, he's just not willing to give it up.
I mean,
they were playing for time, weren't they? I mean, the Rohirrim were coming, at least they thought they were.
You don't have to play for time by leaving your nicely secure walls. You just play for time by literally sitting back and playing cards and, drinking mead until they show up.
No, they
and trying to
built up
defend
the outer wall because of that, because as soon as they get to the inner wall or the actual wall of the city, they break it pretty goddamn fast, so they had to play for time in Osgiliath and at the outer wall. That's why they built it.
Okay, fine.
But they didn't know the orcs were bringing gunpowder.
Okay, fine.
And
but
it says that
you decide tactically you want to defend the Ramas Echor. Why would you send your only surviving son to do that? Send some lower captain.
Yeah, maybe not that. That's what I meant.
Send the Prince of Dol Amroth. He's useless.
Yeah.
What?
What? He's like,
well, he's not.
he's like their
useless.
only cavalry other than the Rohirrim.
Yeah. Well, I didn't actually mean he was useless. He was
He's a very
useless in the story.
But I mean, as well, it says that they made the enemy pay dearly when they crossed over Osgiliath and the outer walls, so they did inflict heavy casualties on them, so that did help some. So, of course, they're going to use the defenses that they built.
Sorry, I was distracted by all the Prince of Dol Amroth shipping going on the IM. But no, I think the point, like, you're trying to say, well, we've got the Ramas Echor, that's why we built it, so we should, go and use it to, like, delay the siege reaching the inner wall. But isn't the whole point that Tolkien is making kind of like a World War I specific analogy, saying, look, the French built the Maginot Line and it was fucking useless. And like all this like false hope you get from lying back behind a wall is stupid, because when push comes to shove, it's always too long to defend properly.
Okay, that evening, the retreat on Skidliff turns into a rout, and but only with great delay does Denethor allow a rescue sortie to come from Gondor, led by the Prince of Dol Amroth. The charge is successful, but Denethor orders a retreat to the city, and the prince enters carrying Faramir's body. Seeing his near-dead son, Denethor goes to his tower to look at the Palantir and returns ashen and resigned to death. What a dick.
What? He thinks his son's died.
He had one job.
He thinks his son's died and the world is ending. I mean...
No, he knows he's still alive.
He just thinks everyone's going to die anyway, and even if he survives, he's going to turn into a slave to Mordor. I mean, the options aren't fantastic at this point.
Also, apparently he's been sleeping in armor for years, which, I don't know, but that's not the most comfortable thing in the whole world. Maybe that explains his bitterness a little bit.
Yeah, so he's a bit unhinged.
So basically it's all because he just didn't get a good night's sleep.
Yes.
The next day, the forces of Mordor lay their trenches and prepare for the siege. Their catapults shoot over the wall and with fire, and then even worse, mutilated heads of the fallen Gondorian soldiers who fall at Osgiliath and in the Ramas. Then the Mordor Air Force come, petrifying the citizens even more. But Denethor will not rally his people. He believes Sauron has the ring and that all is lost. Gandalf takes charge of the defence of the city, but his main impact seems to be the temporary lifting of hearts of the men he's with, even against the Black Shadow. There are too few archers to defend the walls, and the great siege towers built in Osgiliath are rolled towards them. The first circle of the city is burning as the night falls, but the captains who ask Denethor for orders are just ignored. He's gone totally batshit crazy with despair and decides to burn himself and Faramir. He releases a shocked Pippin from his service and calls for his other servants. Pippin follows them to Rathdenan and begs the men not to follow Denethor's orders, but they refuse because they're either the most stupid or the most stuck up and never mind.
Or Tolkien is basically making an analogy, right? I mean, he's making an analogy to people who just followed orders in Nazi Germany. So, yeah.
Maybe.
I think clearly, I think so much of this whole thing is about World War I and World War II, no matter what he says.
Yeah, but when he says when he asks not to, they pretty much say, "Who's the Lord of the City? It's not the wizard, is it?" Something along those lines.
Yeah, but it's so stupid. I mean, the guy isn't even dead yet, and you're burning him. It's just, it's so frustrating.
Also, let's just note that Pippin has the worst exit interview ever. Denethor's just like, go now and die in what way seems best to you.
But that's in the movie, right? Or is that in the book as well?
That's in the book.
That's in the book. Yeah.
No, the movie, he sort of just hauls him out and throws him out the door.
That just kind of proves that he really thinks everyone's gonna die anyway. And he's just trying to die in the way that he for some reason thinks is least horrible or whatever.
Look,
so,
okay, in defense of...
But instead of going down in a blaze of glory, he decides to go down in just a blaze. And
yeah, I
don't go down fighting.
But I think but why? Like, I mean, isn't Denethor in some way rational? Rather than these sword-swinging, like dumb jocks who think, oh, I'm going to die, but I'm going to go down fighting and I'll take a few of them with me. And, glory and honor. He's just like, fuck off, we're all going to die anyway. Like, the fact that you take two with you, you swing a sword, no one's going to be alive to sing tales of your honor anyway. I mean, I kind of have a certain sympathy with the brutal rationalization that he has. Like, given the information he has, I don't think it's entirely stupid to come to the conclusion he comes to. Just like with Saruman. I don't think Tolkien writes it that unsympathetic.
He wouldn't have to just give up though, because he doesn't know, he clearly seems to think that everyone's gonna die, but he doesn't know. And if he went out and fought, he could try and change something about those situations.
Yeah, but he's looked into the Palantir and he has seen fuck off like 20,000-30,000 Mordor troops. He knows that even if by some, miracle of white wizardly awesomeness they win at Pelennor Fields, it doesn't matter because there's shitloads of troops in Barad-dûr. And let's not forget that when they have the last debate, Gandalf admits this. He says, let's not ignore the wisdom that Denethor has. The odds are stupid. We literally cannot win this through fighting. We cannot win this through fighting. We can only win it by helping Frodo. But Denethor doesn't know about Frodo, right? So if you didn't know about Frodo and you're as white as Gandalf, why don't you think it's
new? About Frodo. He does know about Frodo.
Yeah, okay, so he knows about Frodo, but he doesn't realise there's still a chance. He thinks the ring has already gone to Sauron, basically. So, it's kind of like, I don't think, given the information he has, it's a stupid decision. That's all I'm saying.
Well, he's going to burn himself alive. I don't have sympathy for that.
Yeah, but
okay, fine, burn yourself down, but why take your son with you?
He burns himself alive.
We're all going to die, so I'm going to kill myself in the most painful way possible. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah, why not just...
Not delirious. But to continue my devil's advocate role, like Denethor when he finally decides to burn himself alive, he's pushed to it by Gandalf. In the film, literally pushed to it by Gandalf. But in the movie, it's kind of like he said, you have tried to boss everyone around. You've tried to rule the city. You want to put Aragorn on the throne and rule through him. I'm not going to let you take my fate away from it. It's like it's the only thing he can do to grasp his own fate against Gandalf's evil machinations, in his mind anyway.
Yeah, no sympathy.
I mean, his whole job is to look after the city until the king comes back. So he should be pleased that the king's coming back.
Yeah, but the point is that he believes there is literally 100% no way to look after the city. If there's no way to look after the city and your only job is to look after the city, that might make you suicidal.
Does he just not want his remains to be desecrated, like him and Faramir's?
Yeah, I mean, let's bear in mind.
I think that's part of the decision.
These people have been throwing the mutilated heads of people who fell at Osgiliath over the walls of the city. And he says very specifically, we will not be entombed with our ancestors. We are going to be burned. And I think there is something almost honourable in that.
No, there isn't. He's going to kill himself and his son in the same way that Gandalf explains this later on. That's the same way that the slaves of Sauron used to do it. I mean, that's something that Sauron has planted in his mind. It's just madness.
Yeah, but look at the wording. Look at the wording he uses. He says, rather than having a classic sort of Valenoran or whatever religious burial entombment, I'm going to burn myself as the heathens did. Like, he's almost saying, like, what is the point of believing in all this high and noble bullshit? Because at the end of the day, evil wins. So he's making a conscious, desecration. He's saying, like, I'm going to do something pagan and heathen and anti. I don't give a shit about all you Valars and angels walking amongst us. You've been absolutely no use whatsoever, so fuck you. I'm actually starting to believe my defense of Denethor. Maybe if I carry on going for 5 minutes, I'll really... But I just think there's more to it than just he's an absolute nutcase.
Well, I think he's a nutcase. Anyway, after... so Pippin gets fired, and he runs trying to get help, and runs into Beregond in his way, and begs him to leave his post, saying that he has to choose between orders and life. Meanwhile, down at the city gates, Grond, the wolf-headed siege engine, is dragged by great beasts and is set against the gates of the city at midnight. After 3 blows of this mighty ram, the gates of Minas Tirith burst asunder, and in rides the Lord of the Nazgul, with only Gandalf and Shadowfax, who are standing firm against him. And the Nazgul reveals that he is indeed the Witch King, and then proceeds to generally smack talk Gandalf for a bit. But before they fight, dawn breaks, the cock crows, and horns are heard. The riders of Rohan had come at last. The end.
Well, according to Denethor, anyway.
I appreciate your valiant attempt to...
blowing
it seems like
the ones with the Rohirrim are one of the most amazing things I've ever read.
Yeah, they are awesome.
Yeah, I get goosebumps.
Definitely. I just want to say that it just seems that in this podcast we have managed to vilify and rail on all the good.
Yeah, I guess the Witch King has some redeeming features as well. He just didn't want to die.
He's just a guy that wanted to live forever. Leave him alone.
It was pro-feminism. He said no man could kill him.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm going to get to it.
One thing is, I wrote an essay like 10 years ago about Shakespeare's influence on Tolkien and stuff. And this scene, like the whole Nazgul king thingy with no man can kill me, is actually, well, a lot of people think that's a reference to Macbeth.
It's blatantly nicking it, isn't it?
Yeah, well, one thing is that, well, for everyone who doesn't know that, you should go see some. But anyway, Macbeth says he can't be killed by a man who was born from the womb of a woman. So Macduff, who ends up killing him, actually had a C-section. Well, was born by a C-section. So that's why he can kill him. And apparently Tolkien thought that was kind of a poor way to deal with that prophecy. And he thought it wasn't very witty to resolve it that way. So he kind of made his own version, like his own better version of it.
He did the same thing with the trees in Isengard.
Yeah,
like, no, the forest will actually walk.
Yeah, because in Macbeth there's that Burnham forest that's moving towards the castle. And Tolkien's like, that's kind of cheap. I'll just make trees move instead. my Shakespeare input.
No, thanks for sharing that. Makes sense.
Yeah, I guess because I haven't read Shakespeare, I don't really get the
You
sort
don't
of
read, you go to the theater.
Well, I don't go to the theater either, but so it's I don't recognize it as that, so I like it. But I guess Bina has earlier said that it's sort of like, I guess it diminishes it for you because you know that it's taken from there. Because at the very first podcast, Bina sort of dismissed the prophecy that Glorfindel made about it. And what about you, Tanya? Does it diminish the?
But it's not exactly a technicality here, is it? I mean, it's a combination of Merry and Eowyn that manages to defeat the Witch King, right? And Merry isn't a human at all. He's a hobbit.
Yeah.
So if it had been just Eowyn, I think that would have been true because it would have been just a technicality. You know, I'm not a man, I'm a woman. But in this case, Merry is involved as well.
So do you think that when Pippin comes to the wall, then he says that he's not valiant and he's not a man, that's sort of foreshadowing of that as well?
Maybe. That's interesting. I didn't think of that.
Maybe it was just Glorfindel being like, no man will kill him. I'm going to fucking kill him. Because he's an elf. He doesn't count.
Yeah.
And he didn't because he didn't come down to the fight.
Yeah, like all the bloody elves. They're just sitting back telling stories. Okay. Oh, look, all those funny humans. We get to escape over the sea. They're gonna die.
I guess we didn't get the actual confrontation between Gandalf and the Witch King here, so I guess it would have been nice to see them sort of match off against each other.
Oh yeah, that was interesting.
Oh, Gandalf will totally kick his ass.
Don't we see a little of that in the
he
next chapter?
Gandalf isn't a man either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe it was just like Glorfindel being like all high and mighty. He's like, no man could kill him. I couldn't even kill him. Just thinking to himself, like, men are pathetic.
Back with the elfish douche, you know. On to the next chapter.
The Ride of the Rohirrim. On the road to Gondor, the riders of the Mark have camped along the Druiden forest in Eastern Orient. Though Elfhelm the Marshal has allowed Merry to ride with Durnhelm, he and his men ignore Merry, and Durnhelm speaks to no one, so Merry is feeling very isolated and lonely. As he tries to go to sleep, he can hear drums beating in the forest, sometimes distant and sometimes near. Although the camp is only a day's ride from Minas Tirith, the road is held against them by Sauron's forces, and the Rohirrim are very tense. After Elfhelm stumbles over Merry in the dark, he tells Merry that the king has sent orders for everyone to be ready at a moment's notice. Merry thinks that the drums belong to the enemy, but Elfhelm says that they are the drums of the Wozes, the wild men of the woods, and the drums are how they communicate from a distance. A headman of the wild men is being taken to the king, and Merry sneaks up to the king's tent to hear the discussion. The headman, Ran Buri Ran, refuses to join his men to King Theoden's forces, but agrees to lead the riders by an ancient road now forgotten by all but the wild men, and bring them back to the main road beyond the point where the enemy's forces are waiting. In return for this service, Ran Buri Ran asks only that after the war is over, the wild men will be left alone and not hunted.
Well, I just thought it was funny, like, how Theoden is like, you do this and you can ask any reward you want, and he's like, yeah, maybe if you guys could stop killing us, that would be nice.
And it's not even just killing us, it's like hunting us for sport. It's hilarious.
But aren't like the Rohirrim are in Gondor now? I mean, in Orient now, right? They're not in Rohan anymore. So why were they hunting wild men? Maybe it was the Gondorians that were hunting them.
Well, it's the river of Celebrant. That's their border, right? So let's draw up a map.
It mentions the Druiden forest is in Anorian, right, which is not a part of Rohan.
Yeah, but I think it's like bordering it. I think they can go hunting there. They're protecting their borders. Maybe they're protecting them against these kind of like Neanderthal beasties.
Okay. Ran Buri Ran leads the riders by hidden paths back to the main road, where nothing now lies between them and the walls of the Pelennor. One of Ran's men brings word to him that the orcs have torn down the walls, and Eomer is pleased to hear this, as the riders will not now have to slow down when they reach the shattered walls. As Ran takes his leave of the king, he declares, wind is changing.
It's so cool that he can like put his nose to the ground and like scent the sea breeze in the air and think, yeah, and like, but he knows that that's not evil, that that's going to be Aragorn. Like it's in some abstract way good. I love that shit.
Now under cover of the night, the Rohirrim ride silently towards the Pelennor, and Durham leaves his place and moves forward until he is riding directly behind the king's guard. Nearing the walls, Theoden organizes his men, and on reaching the walls, the few orcs remaining there are quickly dispatched. As the riders pass into the Pelennor Fields, they see the fires burning all around Minas Tirith, but still they ride unchallenged as all of the enemy's attention is directed towards the city under siege. Seeing the agony of Minas Tirith, the king is struck as if by dread, but suddenly they feel the wind from the south and see the dawn rise beyond the gloom. Now Theoden seizes a horn and blows a mighty blast, and the rest of the Rohirrim take up their horns and join him. The king now charges on Snowmane towards the enemy's forces and outpaces his riders, Eomer's Reread, his personal guard, even his banner bearer. As the light of the morning rises, the charge of the Rohirrim strikes terror in the host of Mordor, and the riders sing as they slay their enemies, such that the song can be heard even inside the city.
Awesome balls.
Yeah, I mean, the end of this chapter is just, Theoden is just magnificent here. But stupid as well. Yeah, I mean, charging with all your passion is well and good, but practicality demands that you stay with the host and not right ahead of them, as that is a sure way of riding to your death.
It was so funny when I was rereading this. I was like, Nadia is not going to like the impracticality of this scene.
Yeah, as amazing and as passionate as the speech is, and as amazing as that charge, it's just, you know, there's this, you know, Snowmane is white and then his hair is blowing in the wind, and oh, amazing imagery, but then just that's so stupid.
It gets him killed, doesn't it, basically? I mean, he just...
Yes.
No, because he's riding, I mean, he's the king. And he's the first person they'll want to attack, right? And he's just making it all easier for them. And I think Eomer does the same thing afterwards, where he just rides through the enemy and is sort of separated from his main force.
Yeah, but at least Eomer, when he does it, knows it's quasi-suicidal. He thinks all hope is lost. At this point, Theoden is hoping ultimately to lead them to victory still.
Well, he was always riding to think that he wouldn't be coming back.
Right. He thought he was going to die.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but thinking that you're going to die in a war and then actually doing something suicidal, those are completely different things.
Well, he's like the opposite of Denethor. He doesn't really feel like they have a chance, but he's going to go down this way as opposed to killing himself without putting up a fight.
But again, even if you do think that, wouldn't it be better to take as many orcs with you as possible? And, if you're riding together, a solid charge will take down more orcs than, one person riding into them and then followed by a few more and then followed by a few more. That's gonna lessen the impact of the attack. Whereas if you all charge down on them at the same time, it's gonna make, it's gonna cause absolute havoc.
I like that. Gandalf and
defense.
Denethor actually discussed this, like Denethor is like, well, the wise man leads from the rear and, he can see more things from there and doesn't go to the front, and Gandalf is like, yeah, that's the way the witch leads. You got that in common.
Yeah, well, does anyone else think he was there just being possessed by a quasi-angelic entity? Because there's a line there. Orome. There is a line that says, pretty much says, he's being possessed by this guy. Which, before the Silmarillion came out, no one actually knew who he was.
Yeah, he's like the hunter of the Pantheon, right?
Oh, yeah. He's the one who spent the most time in the land before everyone else came over.
He's the one that actually found the elves.
Yeah.
So did anyone else get that when you read?
I think they're just saying he looked like them, but I don't know who there would have known I don't think anybody there's ever seen Orome. So.
Well, if a Hobbit is writing this, if Bilbo's writing this, Bilbo would know about Orome because of the elves.
But Bilbo wasn't there.
I mean, yeah. Frodo would have written this part if we're thinking about Red Book of Westmarch.
Well, I sort of think it's a hint that the Valar were actually helping a little bit, but in ways you wouldn't notice. Cause,
I agree.
Yeah, in the Houses of the Healing, there's like a wind there as well.
And like when Sam calls out Elbereth with the bottle and basically shatters the Watchers. That's not in this part of the book.
I was thinking about it though.
I'm sure he does. Jesus, those rocks almost hit me. Jesus.
Yeah, I actually thought this was just sort of like comparing him to some kind of mythical being, but yeah, I guess. But like it could be like divine inspiration like that, even though I guess that it's not really laid out that if the Rohirrim really believe in anything. I guess they have the idea that they go to the halls of their fathers after they die or something.
Well, their horses are actually spawned from Orome's original horse. That's the whole, like, the Shadowfax and all those horses.
Oh, the Myriads or whatever?
Yeah, they're actually spawned from Orome's original horse.
Well, it could be. It's kind of a cool observation, I guess.
I think either way you want to read it sounds cool. I mean, if he looked like one of the Valar, it's awesome, and if he actually was possessed by him, it's even more awesome. He must have been dispossessed when the spear hit him, though.
What, when his full horse fell on him?
Yeah, the spear hit him, and then his horse fell on him. And then Orome's like, all right, you're on your own. Tried my best. My horse is never going to get hit by that spear.
The thing about the attack is, even if, it does get Theoden killed, the thing is, it brings hope back to the city, right? It gives them the strength to fight on.
Huh?
Well,
The hope comes back to the city when Aragorn turns up with a fucking huge naval ghostly force.
Yeah, but even just the Rohirrim turning up, I mean, they've been waiting for them to come.
Yeah.
For a while.
Rohirrim turning up gives them hope. The fact that Theoden gets killed is neither here nor there. Like, he could have given them hope and stayed with the main force of the cavalry and not gotten killed.
Well, yeah. We already agreed it was stupid.
Well, I guess we can agree that it was Denethor's fault that Theoden died, and not Theoden's, because he was messing around with Faramir, and Gandalf would have, gotten the Witch King if he hadn't attended to Faramir. So let's blame Denethor.
No.
Gandalf does. Gandalf does.
Well,
Gandalf even says, I could have prevented death if I didn't have to do this.
Well, then let's blame Pippin, because he put Faramir's life beyond the life of all the others on the field that Gandalf might be helping.
Yeah.
Just kidding.
That's not fair to Pippin. No.
He gets blamed for enough.
Because we can be mean to Sam, but
Gandalf is the one that chooses to go and help Faramir instead of Theoden, right? And he could have chosen the other way. It wouldn't have been Pippin's.
He even says that he does it with great peril to someone else, something like that.
So, Bina, are you advocating burning Faramir alive in favor of Theoden? I thought you were a fan of his.
I'm a fan of Faramir. I just have because he's high, but it's because it's in contrast to what I am, which is utterly cynical and rational, which is what Denethor is. So, I've got a lot of time for both.
My father burnt me to death because I got high.
Because I got high. Because I got high. Because I got high. La da 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 da.
Sorry, that's okay. We have to share it.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if anybody's ever read the guy that in Russia that wrote the whole Lord of the Rings from the orcs' point of view thing. Has anybody else read that?
No.
Sounds awesome.
Well, it's in it. They say how the elves poison everything, and they are always poisoning them. It's quite interesting, but it's not quite the same, because a lot of the stuff is this is written this way because it's from the Winter's point of view, and they change a lot of things. So it's a lot different. Gandalf is this really manipulative guy who's trying to take over the whole world, and Aragorn's a douchebag.
True in the book.
Well, I think that's kind of what he was going for. And the orcs were just a industrial society that accidentally poisoned the land around him, and that's why it was all barren. It's interesting. It's definitely not canon, but it's interesting.
and they all got this highly industrial society got beat down by a load of tree huggers.
It's different. It's hard to explain. You kind of have to read it to understand.
Over to you, Amanda.
All right. Chapter 6, the Battle of Pelennor Fields. The king of the Nazgul vanished from the gate as Theoden arrived within miles or so of the city. Rohirrim were actively fighting among the siege weaponry, but there were many enemies in between them and the gates of Minas Tirith. Theoden and a chieftain of the Rohirrim with a serpent banner sat at their entrance and slays the chieftain. The Rohirrim cavalry ride away in terror, but in the midst of his glory, while his shield is dimmed, and he cries, to me, up Aerlingus, fear no darkness. But then Snowmane is pierced by a dart, shot by the fell beast of Mordor, and collapses upon Theoden as the Lord of the Nazgul descends upon them. There's a quote. He was come again, bringing ruin, turning hope to despair, and victory to death. And the other Rohirrim are driven away, their mounts ride them off in fear, except for Merry, who's fallen from his horse and crawling towards them, and Durnhelm. And a quote, a little to the left facing them stood she whom he had called Durnhelm, but the helm of her secrecy had fallen from her, and her bright hair, released from its bonds, gleamed with pale gold upon her shoulders. Her eyes, grey as the sea, were hard and fell, and yet tears were on her cheek. A sword was in her hand, and she raised her shield against the horror of her enemy's eyes. Eowyn it was, and Durnhelm also. For into Merry's mind flashed the memory of the face he saw at the riding from Dunharrow, the face of one that goes seeking death, having no hope. Merry finds his feet and courage and doesn't want her to die alone, and he tries to get up. The beast descends on Eowyn, and she doesn't falter. Though it attacks her, she slices off its head. The Witch King strides towards Eowyn, and at that moment, Merry stabs him in the back of his knee. The Witch King cries out, and with Eowyn's last bit of strength, she stabs him in the chest, and his robes collapse with shrill wailing. Merry is blinded with tears, and he sees Eowyn collapsed upon the ground and sees Theoden lying in his glory. Theoden and Merry have a deeply emotional parting, full of tears, and he just sits there. Eomer then rides up, and Theoden crowns him king of the Rittermark. Eomer is prepared to have Theoden's body taken from the field, and suddenly sees Eowyn lying on the ground, and his heart stops. He cries out, and he's like, why are you here? And the Rohirrim don't sing anymore, and all is silent, and they just cry out death, loud and terrible. Merry finds his weapon and his shield, but the sword of the Barodowns has melted away, its original purpose being forged by the Dunedain against the Witch King of Angmar being fulfilled. They burn the fell beast of the Nazgul and raise a cairn over the men of the king's household and make a gravestone for Snowmane. Some of this happens afterwards. Merry walks with the bearers of Theoden's remains, while Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth rides up, discovers Eowyn is like, yo, Rohirrim, she's totally not dead. Do you guys not have any healers? And sends off for a healer for her. So all that happens. So you guys want to talk about that first before I keep going? There's a lot.
I think when Eomer comes up and he's like, what is she doing here? I'm sure Elfhelm was like, yeah, what is she doing here? How could she have gotten here?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I think at that point, if Eomer had realized Elfhelm had let Eowyn come, I think Elfhelm was gone.
Yeah, Elfhelm would have been like, ride to doom, everyone, go!
Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess that is one of my favorite parts of the whole story. I mean, it's just so great. I mean, all that sort of like defiance, at least, I mean, against like some ancient evil like the Witch King. That's like the coolest thing ever. Like, she laughs in his face, and that line that a sword rang out as it was drawn. That's really cool. Especially in face of like the Witch King talks mad shit about like taking her to the houses of lamentation where she'll be tortured forever and her spirit will be flayed and all that. Then she's like, whatever, come near my king and I'm gonna smite you.
It's actually quite amazing she even can stand up to him.
Yeah.
When most people just flee in terror at the mere sight of him.
Because she doesn't care if she lives or dies in that moment.
I mean, that's the key point, right? She's ridden to battle seeking death, and that's why if you don't fear death, you don't run.
It's a good thing she didn't burn herself.
Oh, come on,
And
guys.
kind of cool. She actually cuts the fell beast's head off with one blow.
Yeah.
Damn, strong.
Well, bird bones are skinny.
It's a big old bird. It's
Like a pterodactyl or something.
Yeah, maybe.
They say it's a bird, like some kind of bird that Sauron has.
Well, no, it
messed up.
doesn't have
Yeah,
feathers.
but it's not red. It's like a prehistoric, that bird-like dinosaur thing.
I think the movie version is actually pretty good.
Yeah, I like the movie version, but I don't think that's what they. I think they call it a bird in the book, like a great bird.
Yeah, but it say that it had leathery wings, so it can't be a bird, and it says that it was maybe from some older world or something like that. I guess that would maybe.
So a dinosaur.
Yeah, dinosaur. It's a pterodactyl.
All right.
It's like a counterpart to the eagles.
It's larger than the eagles, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, they're always making shitty knockoffs of things like elves and ants and eagles.
She never could have took off an eagle's head with one swing. I like how it says how tall and how slender she is, and she just kind of steps to the side as it reaches out to bite her and cuts off its head because she's so skinny, I can't get her.
Do you guys think that Frodo would have been taken to the Houses of Lamentation if he had been captured?
He was captured.
I think so.
Well, if he had been
He would have been.
taken all the way there. I mean, I guess the mouth of Sauron talks some shit about that. That's sounds pretty similar to what the Witch King is describing here.
Where are the rebels? Where is the ring? How many men are with him?
It all sounds a bit dark.
Is there any gold in the village?
Was there any gold in the village? So do you want me to read do the last little part about the elephants and such? To continue, their several Mumassel around and they cry out, and Eomer and his men ride against the Haradrim, though they're vastly outnumbered. Glasmog, the foul lieutenant of Mordor, who's kind of leading this whole thing now that the Witch King's out, through the Easterlings and the Haradrim against the Rohirrim and attempts to separate the Rohirrim and the forces of Gondor from joining forces. At this moment, the Crusaders of Umbar sail down the Anduin, and the retreat is sounded from Gondor. Eomer is stern and laughs at death, and suddenly he sees the ships and realizes it's the banners of Elendil, and Aragorn and Legolas and everybody starts jumping off the boats. Aragorn and Eomer find themselves in the midst of the battle, and they ride in together. The day passes, and no living foe is left on the field, and many are slain, and poems and songs are created about the fallen. And that's the chapter.
My favorite part is the part when they show up. Does anybody mind if I read it? I just love it.
No, it's so good. You should read it. The whole chapter is beautiful.
I may have edited it a little bit to make it sound better, because Tolkien wasn't that good at writing. and lo, even as he laughed at despair, he looked out again on the black ships, and he lifted his sword to defy them. And then wonder took him, and a great joy, and he cast his sword up in the sunlight and sang as he caught it. And all eyes followed his gaze, and behold, upon the foremost ship a great standard broke, and the wind displayed it as she turned toward the Harlan. There flowered a white tree, and that was for Gondor, but 7 stars were about it, and a high crown above it, the sign of Elendil, and no lord has borne it for years beyond count. And the stars flamed in the sunlight, for they were wrought of gems by Arwen, daughter of Elrond, and the crown was bright in the morning, for it was wrought of mithril and gold. Thus Aragorn, son of Arathorn, Elisar, Isildur's heir, out of the paths of the dead, borne upon a wind of the sea to the kingdom of Gondor, and the mirth of the Rohirrim was a torrent of laughter and a flashing of swords, and the joy and wonder of the city was a music of trumpets and ringing of bells. But the hosts of Mordor were seized with bewilderment, and a great wizardry it seemed to them that own ships should be filled with their foes. Aragorn came forth from the ships with Anduril, the flame of the west, held aloft, and cried, "Look at my sword!" Mordor's armies gazed upon it, and its black tread fell on them, knowing that the tides of fate had turned against them and that their doom was at hand.
Nice.
It gives you chills, except for the sword part.
No, that part gives me the most chill.
So going back to the beginning of that, did Eomer invent the finger dance?
What's that mean?
The game thing. Yeah, but obviously the Ironborn changed it to an axe because they're more badass.
Sorry, I kept stumbling through it. I'm not very good at reading aloud.
I took it for a
Yeah,
moment.
at least you're a better writer than Tolkien. I want to go on the record.
I did much better at my part.
I just want to say I think this is the single best chapter of any book I've ever read. I just think it's so beautifully written, so moving. In fact, I was just going to say that I think it's the best chapter in any fantasy I've ever read, but fuck it. It's just the best, hands down. There's so much battle. It's like 10 pages. It's beautiful writing. It moves you to tears. It gives you the shivers. Oh my goodness. Every single sentence of this chapter is just genius. So there you go. Fangirl rant over.
Including the one that was added.
That's what I was like. You can have all the Faramir chapters. I just want Pelennor Fields. That's all I want.
I love that part when it's like Eomer is like that, but he laughed for he was young and lord of a fell people. And he was king or something like that. That's really cool. But again, I'm gonna rant a little bit about the whine about that how they did it in the movie, because in the movie they just sort of had the army of the dead stream from the boats and just kill all the orcs, and that's kind of like, that's not good, because the army of the dead, they're the bad guys kind of too.
They didn't even come to the Pelennor Fields, right?
Yeah, they didn't even use them as a weapon, really. What they did, but it was a weapon of psychological warfare against the Corsairs. And the actual battle was won by the sort of the men of Southern Gondor and Aragorn, and the sort of inspiration that they brought. It's kind of the same thing as the elves at Helm's Deep. Like, they had the elves holding the Rohirrim's hands. They're like, they couldn't do it on their own, and now they needed like a weapon of mass destruction here.
Well, I completely agree with you. I completely agree with you. Like, the whole point about the dead army is that it just causes the enemy to flee. They don't actually have to raise a sword. And the whole point about this battle is that it should be, you know, the real-life freed slave army of Aragorn and the men like the Lord of Lossarnach coming up from the south, and the Rohan, the men of Rohan fighting together to defeat the evil. Because otherwise, why should we believe that the age of men is upon us and that these men are now stepping up into their destiny? Like, it can't all just be magic. So, I agree.
Well, they ran out of budget, and they couldn't afford to hire all those extras, so they just decided to do it this way.
Yeah, I guess the time was kind of a premium in the movie as well, but it's so lame when it's like a bunch of ants crawling over the Mumakil in the city.
Well, maybe time ran out because they put
battle in the whole book.
The problem is before we even start the extended edition of this film, there's 40 minutes of crap that should have been in the second film that they moved to the third film, like the whole Voice of Saruman stuff. So if they ran out of time in this film, that's just bad planning. Also, my only other slightly weird point is that I always thought, I mean, I love this. Nothing in literature makes me more happy than the way the Witch King of Angmar gets offed. But I always thought, in retrospect, in cooler moments, that it's kind of a shame that he isn't killed by a Dunedain, because like he pours like acres of shit on them, and it would have been a bit more like poetic justice if one of them had killed him. But you know, never mind.
One of their swords is there, though.
Yeah.
And the Dunedain were protecting the Shire to some extent. Like, at least the Rangers later on, like, part of what they do is protect the Shire's borders and keep them kind of, like, out of, like, the dealings of the world. So in a way, like, a hobbit slaying the Witch King with the Dunedain's weapon is kind of like poetic justice, because it's, like, prepaying that massive debt.
Oh, okay, so it's like a massive circle of stabbing. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know, it's just yeah.
I wonder if they looted the pile of rags that he fell into to try to find his ring.
The ring rays have the rings still. I mean,
well, they have the 9 rings.
Oh yeah, true.
So what happened to the ring after he died? That time to put up a track of theory.
Well, presumably it just sort of
what
melted
happened to
into
the ring
air,
when
like,
one of the ring rays?
Well, when the one was destroyed, they probably would. I think what happened was the Prince of Dol Amroth picked it up, and then he became Ramsay Snow. But it was okay because when the One Ring was thrown into Orodruin, that it lost its power, so he became normal again. It was a very short reign of craziness.
He's kind of a dick, though. I mean, in the last debate when he's like laughing, like, yeah, well, like killed, like Sauron is gonna crush us with his little finger or something, and Aragorn is like, dude, shut up.
Dude, shut up. Where did you get that ring? Don't worry about it.
But I guess it says that when Witch King dies, that he wasn't seen again in that age of the world or something like that. But I guess that's sort of like a florid way of saying that he wasn't seen again.
Well, Yeah, but I mean, it also means that he probably hasn't completely gone, right? Because, I mean, that's the point about Sauron, that he will be defeated and he won't be able to take human form again, or form of any kind again. But he will still exist as annoying evil. That's what they say at the last debate.
Right, he'll just be a weak, malevolent spirit.
Yeah.
Annoying evil.
So there's an element to which you never ultimately completely kill off the sequel.
So when he dies, he just turns into mosquitoes. Just an annoying evil.
He turns into the people who stand side by side in airport travelators so that you can't walk past quickly.
Just the end of the chapter where we get the list of the dead.
Oh yeah.
It's very heart-wrenching. Even though most of these characters we've only seen for like a couple of pages, but still, it's very tricky.
Yeah, and I love that.
The fact that he even chose to include it.
The fact, and also he chooses to end the chapter with it. Like, it's like, I'm going to tell you about all these noble and great people, but at the end of the day, I'm going to bring it back to the mid-ranking people, the people who you probably won't have read about in heroic songs, and just tell you about the real cost of battle. And I think it's one of the most, I normally skip through the songs in Tolkien, but I think the Mounds of Mundberg is one of the most amazing songs in there. I really love that.
Does anybody else know how to even read the songs and the poetry in Tolkien? I have the hardest time with it.
I usually try to rhyme like the first few paragraphs, but then I'm like, oh fuck it, I'm just gonna read it. Like do some kind of inject some music into it or something that I'm just gonna read it.
He's pretty good about punctuating in a way so that you know where the breaths are, I feel like.
But it just doesn't flow to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm not very good at understanding poetry.
I think the poems from Rohan are very lyrical. Like, I find it really easy to read those and they flow. I think it depends on the type of poetry, so to say.
Maybe just by the time I've gotten there, I've been beaten down so much by the other poetry, I'm like, I don't even care anymore.
The problem is that the early poems are all fucking Elvish and Tom Bombadillo.
I like Tom Bombadillo.
That group called Tolkien Ensemble, they made songs of all the poems in the Lord of the Rings. Might want to YouTube that. I find
that looks awesome.
I didn't even know that.
That comes to every single poem in the Lord of the Rings, and they're absolutely amazing.
I will definitely check that out.
Best things in the world, and I met you guys, and everyone's so amazing. And I don't ever want to listen to any other music, except maybe Fellowship of Vassals. Anyway, so yeah, listen to that.
Cool, good tip, thanks.
That's my 2 cents about songs.
So on to chapter 7, which is the Pyre of Denethor, which I picked because it has Faramir in it, which was like an own goal because Faramir does nothing in it apart from like be in a coma. Pippin's spirits lift as the dark shadow is lifted, but then the horn blows for battle, and never in after years could he hear a horn blown in the distance without tears starting in his eyes. He begs Gandalf to stop Denethor from burning Faramir alive. Gandalf agrees, but acknowledges that by diverting his attention to save Faramir, others will die. Still he goes, leaving the mysterious Prince Imrahil in charge of the city's defences. When they reach the house of the stewards, only Beregond has refused to obey Denethor's insane orders. Gandalf's appearance is somehow magical, for his coming was like the incoming of a white light into a dark place, and he magics away Denethor's sword. Denethor not only despairs, but has a death wish. He says, "The west has failed. It shall all go up in a great fire, and all shall be ended." Ash and smoke blown away in the wind. Gandalf makes a powerful, sort of quasi-Christian argument against this. Authority is not given to you, steward of Gondor, to order the hour of your death. Only the heathen kings, under the domination of the Dark Power, did thus, slaying themselves in pride and despair, murdering their kin to ease their own death. Which I think is probably precisely Denethor's point. Denethor then reveals his palantir and his despair at seeing a black fleet sail up the Anduin. He also accuses Gandalf of wanting to rule Gondor by supplanting Denethor with Aragorn and then ruling through him. He also says that he would not have given up his stewardship even if Aragorn's claim had been proven. His wish would have been to leave his steward's chair to his son had he not been a wizard's pupil. Failing that, then I will have naught, the ultimate nihilism. Denethor then goes to kill Faramir, but Beregond stops him. Denethor breaks his steward's staff. He lies on the bier with his palantir and is burned alive. His 2 hands long after seen clasping the palantir, which is just like an awesome horror trope right there. Faramir is then carried into the houses of the healing, and they hear a piercing cry, which I'm assuming is the death of the Witch King of Angmar. For suddenly their hearts were lifted up in such a hope as they had not known since the darkness came out of the east. At this point, Gandalf claims that he always knew there was a Palantir in the city, and that Denethor's wisdom failed and he dared to use it. He was too great to submit to the will of the dark power. He saw nonetheless only those things which that power permitted him to see. Like, now Gandalf knows what's been going on. And Aragorn is like, yeah, we always knew that. And then in this most bizarre moment at the end, Gandalf tells Aragorn to tell his captain what he did and that he'll probably be dismissed for it, which I just find really bizarre. And that is the end of the chapter. So
I find it interesting how long it took for the Witch King from the gate to get to Theoden and kill him and all that fighting, and Gandalf in all that time he got up to the very top of the city and had all that dialogue with Denethor, and sort of they were already on their way out by the time the Witch King died. Seemed much shorter in the
Gandalf was on Shadowfax.
And the Witch King had to switch mounts.
How was he on a horse?
Oh, he was on a horse
going through the gate.
And then he switched to a Nazgul, or a flying beast.
Oh, I was wondering how Gandalf would have caught him if Pippin hadn't interrupted him, caught the Fellbeast's tail or something. But if he was on a horse, he could have totally just ran after him and didn't do that.
Just kill him real quick, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Here. Okay, let's go, Pippin.
but it wouldn't be much of a book, would it?
Yeah.
In your version of the book,
Frodo
and Sam would get on an eagle, go to Mordor, drop in the ring, job done.
No, I don't actually think the eagles could take the ring because it would whisper to them and they'd go mad or something like that.
They try to take over the world.
They'd wear it on their talon. It does change size.
Yeah.
Like the dragons, they would just consume it.
Nom nom.
That was a good hobbit.
Okay, so my basic serious point to make about this chapter is that for me, I know this isn't a very religious book, but it just feels to me that this particular chapter has a lot to say about suicide. And I just found that when Gandalf tells Denethor that it's not his right to determine the time of his death is a very, Tolkien's a Catholic writer, and I think there's something very, whether consciously or unconsciously Catholic about that attitude. I really like that basically if this whole book is about hope and not even military courage, but just basic, simple hope and courage, which is, I guess, the sin of despair, the sin of simony is to cut yourself off from that and to cut yourself off from God. And I think there's something very powerful about Denethor saying he wants to take the heathen route. He is making a very anti-Christian point. And I think it doesn't sit perhaps very well with the rest of the book because it is so overtly Catholic, on my reading anyway. But that's kind of what I've always taken from it. I don't know what everyone else thinks.
I totally agree.
Yeah, it seems I do too.
Yeah, there's a point earlier in maybe the last chapter that Denethor in it where he's talking about don't say about the drink that I've had to drink, that expressing all the things he's had to deal with in this particular time and place. And I feel like he's just very much an anti-Messiah because he doesn't accept the time. Everyone else kind of accepts the times that have been given to them, and Denethor wishes that he was in some other time where all these things weren't happening and would rather not deal with all the things that are happening in a way that's heroic and instead just succumb to despair.
Yeah, and I tell you why I always defend Denethor, because I also always defend Sansa, because I think both of them take a far less heroic path than the people who see despair and think, you know what, I'm going to be plucky and heroic in its face. I think this is a far more plausible and human reaction to that. Just to give up, I think, is very human, and we should have sympathy with that.
Yeah, giving up yourself and killing yourself is fine, but killing somebody else too, that doesn't.
I think you can make and again, I know that Tolkien says it's not an allegory, but I think you can make I guess I'm arguing against myself with the example I'm about to give. It's like the senior Nazi officials in the bunker who gave their kids suicide pills or, poisoned their children because they didn't want them to fall into enemy hands. I think I'm not advocating, of course, I don't think it's okay for him to want to kill Faramir, but you can see how in his twisted, warped version of the world, I think Denethor does this out of love for Faramir. I really do. Yeah. I think he sees a future. in which all the men of Gondor are slaves to Mordor. And of course, later on, when we get to the mouth of Sauron chapter, and, he's saying, well, I'll give you back Frodo, the captive hobbit, but you guys have to all agree to do homage to me and basically be my vassals. And I think Denethor thinks that what he's doing is in some way an act of love for his son. It's just very messed up.
First one.
Well, it's not the first one, because if he didn't love his son, then he wouldn't have cared that Gandalf had more influence over him. I think he does love his son. And what really pisses me off about the movie is that, and I think John Noble, who plays him, is a really fine theatrical actor, but they play Denethor as this pantomime villain. You know the scene where Pippin's singing and he's eating all this food and it's really gluttonous.
Eating. Oh, that's such a disturbing scene.
It's really disturbing, but it's really over the top. And I think the Denethor of the book is a much more nuanced and tragic and psychologically warped character than that. I mean, he's psychologically warped in a much more interesting.
He's a very noble character.
Yeah, it's nobility warped.
In the book, he's described as a very, very noble lord, but he's lost his way a little bit.
Yeah, they call him wise and beautiful, and the guy in the movie, he just looks like he's probably evil. He's got his hair greased back and has a mean look on his face all the time. So does Elrond in the movie, so I guess it's not that crazy.
Yeah, but I think you have to, in order to feel the tragedy of Denethor and what's happening to Faramir, you have to believe that there was the potential for Denethor to be like Aragorn, to be a wise ruler. He is, after all, a man of Númenor. He's got the blood of Westernessa in him. And I think he probably was a wise steward back in the day when his wife was alive. I think you need to see the capacity for him to have been a good ruler to understand how tragic it is that he has despaired and let his city fall into despair. Otherwise, it's just not as interesting. But I don't think I'm winning everyone over.
Kind of hard to see the story in the light of somebody in it, because we sort of know that it all winds up well in the end, and so we're sort of hey, why is this guy despairing and not doing the heroic thing and all that? So I guess I can see that often in fantasy. I guess it's easier to sort of look at the thing from our perspective, what entertains us and all that, and not what would actually be happening in the mindscape of somebody in that world. I guess the Sansa and Arya comparison here is a good one as well.
The other point I wanted to make about this chapter is that I know a huge accusation against Tolkien is that it's not realistic that Faramir would just give up the ring so easily, and that it just makes the ring seem far less interesting as a concept. But I just wanted to point out that Gandalf says of Denethor that he is so wise and such a great man that through the Palantir, Sauron can't overpower him. And bear in mind, Denethor doesn't become what Theoden is, which is just a kind of frail tool. He does defy him, even if the way in which he defies him is suicide. And I think that maybe, given that we know that Faramir has, the same kind of true blood of his father, but he also has the wizardly learning of Gandalf, maybe it is more sensible that Faramir would be able to resist it, at least in theory, not having seen it or spent any long time with it. Because, it's not like Denethor is so susceptible either. So I think it just makes it more plausible.
Oh, that reminds me, I want to say it was Shane that brought up the not a good vessel thing, not me. I didn't want to steal his glory there, because I think that was a neat thing to say.
Yeah, but
even though he's not here and he made me do his chapter.
Yeah, but and Denethor presumably would have been a good vessel, but even then it was, Denethor had some power to resist, which even Gandalf acknowledges. So I think, ultimately, of course, Faramir would have fallen, as would Denethor. Denethor would have fallen before Faramir, but yeah, I just think it makes the whole thing seem more credible. These are special men; they're not like other Gondorians.
I like how flexible Sauron is in that he can just change his tact. He can't overpower him by will, but then he just shows him things that, doesn't seem that bad until the end when he's just batshit crazy and he's like, well, we're all gonna die. And Sauron just did that by showing him things. I mean, he couldn't lie to him through the Palantir, but he just showed him things, maybe not the full truth, but enough to make him doubt himself.
Yeah, it's
I think that's interesting how Sauron is so tactical. Exactly.
I just think it's, with weaker people, he can be far more direct, and with stronger people, he can just be subtly manipulative, and, yeah, it's fantastic.
Unrelated to this, but in the Silmarillion, the Númenorians show up, and Sauron just submits to them and lets them take him to his island, and then he slowly, corrupts them into thinking they can take on the Valar. And then...
Yeah.
Especially because our Farazan is such a freaking idiot.
You say that, but the Valar did the same thing with Morgoth. It's
I know.
too much pity in the world. Goddamn Nienna.
Yeah.
Tina, any idea what these guys are talking about?
No, you don't. Sorry.
You will, though, guys. You will.
Oh dear. Well, we should explain to the humble podcast listener that I, with all my kind of wisdom, decided that we were only going to cover the first 7 chapters of book 3 book 5 even, because that would probably take long enough. Do people want to push on? Because I do have chapter summaries for the other 3, and I think Shellfish was making the point that, in particular, the last debate, there's a lot of material that relates to this, or do you think we should call it a day and revisit those in the next episode? It's up to you guys.
I like breaking it up. It gives people more to wait for.
Yeah.
Ooh, you're such a tease.
Yeah.
Well, they're not making any more of these, so I would like to squeeze everything we can out of them.
Yeah.
Which makes sense.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Great.
Cool. Does anyone have any final thoughts on this book, though, on the chapters we've been discussing today? Like, overall, like the coolness of... I just think this is awesome. I love every part of what we've just been discussing. It's just genius.
Yep. I agree.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that, profound and reasoned and literate discussion, we will bring this episode of Battles of Kingsgrave, Lord of the Rings Epic Edition to a close. Thank you all for listening, if you're still with us. And tune in next time for Shellfish destroying Legolas and for White Raven destroying Sam as the ring is finally destroyed. Thank you for listening. Bye, everyone.
Right, bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Peter was very restrained about elves today.
It's because there weren't as many.
Honestly, the more I think about it, the more elves are shitty. So I'm with you, Peter.
Yeah.
I'm glad we didn't go through the last debate because that's Legolas going like, yeah, and then this happened, but it didn't bother me because I'm an elf. Yeah. Gimli here was like shitting his pants, but I'm an elf, so it didn't bother me at all.
That's why Gimli had to go in, because the elves were going to pick on him forever.
And then he sees a seagull when he's mentally traumatized.
I think this is why elves aren't breeding, because they're like, oh, look at that tree, and then they just stand there and watch the tree grow for 150 years. It's like, man, we probably should have made a baby. Nah, fuck that.
And the elf ladies are just lying around like, yeah, is anything ever gonna happen?
Look at this maple.
No wonder Arwen likes Aragorn, like he's, red-blooded, as they say.
Getting shit done. It's like, I want babies and Glorfindel isn't doing shit.
Like on occasions when I have to, through the means of 80s rock music, apologize to Shellfish for having misedited him in the previous podcast.
That shit was hilarious.
Oh.
That went over my head. I don't understand the reference. I'm not from this country.
When push comes to shove, you always go through Belgium.
See Sebastopol. Anyone who's ever played Rome Medieval 1, Rome 2, Medieval 2, Total War knows the first thing you do is see Sebastopol.
I haven't played it, but from everything you've said about it, maybe I should.
Just be prepared to lose years of your life.
Alright.
It's actually, what's even worse now is if you play it through Steam, it will tell you how many hours you've wasted on this game. It's like, you've spent 168 hours of your life playing the Barbarian expansion pack from Medieval 2 Total War. It's utterly depressing.
You're like, why don't you just keep that shit to yourself, computer?
I am Sam.
You are Sam. I want White Raven to do the chapter where Sam carries Frodo in the ring and saves the known one.
Yes.
You got it. You got it.
Yes.
I'll do the first one.
I might have to fix some of Tolkien's writing, but yeah, I'll do it.